Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 806. Today we're going to do something new for the channel. About a month ago, I did a hour-and-a-half long podcast / video blog on a bunch of JRPGs that I played last year in 2024. And I'll put a link to that below, basically covering the whole sort of genre, a bunch of old games, some new games, all that kind of stuff, and kind of talk through work through some of my feelings about that genre. And so I've been kind of going back and forth about it. So today I'm going to do a review. I'm going to put this right on this channel. I'm not going to make a new channel. I'm not going to make a new review series. I'm just going to dump these in with all the board game reviews. So it's just going to keep running. You won't see a ton of these, especially in the next couple of months. I still got some board game reviews to catch up on in my backlog as well, but it's going to stay board game focused, but I'm just going to drop these in here from time to time. I've got kind of a format worked out, that kind of thing. And so the thing that triggered it, and not all of these reviews will have this preamble, but this is the first one, so I figured I'll put a little bit more preamble here. Got some good response to that JRPG sort of retrospective kind of video thing. And a lot of folks turned me on to the Nintendo 3DS here. So I've got here a new Nintendo 3DS XL. Actually, it's an LL, which I've modified to be an XL. So, long story short, you can't really buy these anymore. They're long discontinued. The best way to get these is to order one from Japan. You can still get ones that are in really good shape. They're basically like brand new for pretty cheap. And then I'm a software engineer by trade, so the modification part of it is pretty easy for me, although I think most folks could walk through some tutorials and stuff. If you want to know about that, you can ask me. I'm not really going to link to anything. This channel is not like a retro handheld hacking channel or anything like that. But so I really appreciate that, because a lot of folks, based on that JRPG video, turned me on to, hey, you got to check out the 3DS, because there's a ton of games stuck on the 3DS because of the whole, like, if you're not familiar with these, there's two screens on this. You have a top screen and a bottom screen. And I used to have an old DS back in the day, but I never had a 3DS. And they never ported those over to the Switch or the PC or any other platform. And there's a ton of them. So I picked this up to play a bunch of those. And of course, the first one that I played is an old SNES game, which I never played back in the day. I've kind of heard about it through the years, and that's Breath of Fire, which is this review. So I played Breath of Fire on this. And so I was really kind of taken after I finished Breath of Fire, which I've completed. And I was had very mixed feelings about it, but I really liked a lot of it, and there's some stuff I really didn't like. So I figured, let me just do a review on this. And the one thing that I did do with this game is I did not play like the original game, let's say. Because I do have a Switch, I do have a Switch Online subscription, and I actually started playing it on the Switch through there. But one thing that's weird about that is, and this was how it was on the original SNES version, was the translation is like pretty not great, and even like some of the items and the spells and different abilities that you get in the game, they're like these weird abbreviations, and you're trying to figure out like what's going on. And I remember when I looked at it on the Switch, I'm like, well, okay, there should be like a manual with this game, because in the old days they used to have manuals, that would come with the game, and that was part of the game experience. Like a lot of games you didn't really understand how to play at all unless you had the manual and you read it. And this is definitely one of those games. And so I would recommend that no matter how you end up playing this game, whether you play it on Switch or elsewhere, that you do go download the manual, because I don't know how many hours into it I got stuck. And then I looked something up. I'll talk more about looking up stuff on the guides. If you watched my JRPG video, I hate looking up stuff on guides, but in this case I was like, I'm doing something wrong. I looked it up and I'm like, oh, this is in the manual. Oh, that's right, there's manuals to these games. So I closed the guide quick, and then I went and read the manual. I was like, oh, look at all these things that I didn't understand. And so anyway, long story short there, as I played, I'll have a link to romhacking.net. So if you get the ROM, and you could rip the ROM off your Switch if you really needed to, and then you can modify it with a retranslation, and it kind of readjusts some things, kind of fixes some things. So it's kind of like an updated fix for the game. And so that's why in the title it says, ROM hacking, or ROM hack. And I would recommend it that way, because I don't think playing the original game is really worth the whole experience. But I'll talk more about that when we get to the end of it. So let's just kind of set the stage here a little bit. Breath of the Fire was a very early RPG on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. I think it was one of the first. One of the most interesting parts to me of this game, and I'm playing through another game now, Phantasy Star 2, which also has this feature, which the first Phantasy Star, as far as I know, didn't have it, but it has an auto battle feature. And I frankly don't remember very many RPGs back in the day having that kind of auto battle feature. That's something that I noticed to really great effect last year with when I played through a lot of the Final Fantasy Pixel remasters, as well as the Dragon Quest III HD 2D remaster. They had an auto battle thing, and some other games and stuff. But I don't remember really any games back in the late 80s, certainly, and in the 90s having auto battle. Well, obviously, Breath of Fire did, and it's really cool. I like that they have that feature because a lot of times you're kind of tromping through the woods or the overworld, and it's fun and sort of relaxing to grind, but it makes it a lot more tedious if you got to go and do a lot of just button clicking and menu selection stuff. And having the auto battle feature is really nice. It's a very simple auto battle feature. It's just auto attack. It's not something as sophisticated as the Pixel remasters, where it does the last thing that your characters did, which is really cool. But anyway, this is a game that's 30 years old just about. So anyway, it was kind of interesting that this was an older game that actually implemented this feature. And I would say my gist of the game is it's a very traditional sort of RPG, very Dragon Quest-ish. And I would say Dragon Quest-ish in the sense of like a Dragon Quest 5 or 8, which I've played through those, not finished either of those just yet. But in the sense that it's you start off, you have kind of a larger sort of quest goal, sort of a larger big bad that you're going to hit at the end of the game. And then you're going to encounter different areas of the world map, each with their own kind of succinct or little episode or adventure. It's kind of like you're playing through an episode of Kung Fu or The Incredible Hulk from the 70s, where each episode is kind of its own self-contained thing. And you're meeting all these kind of different funny characters and different types of races and creatures and species even with their own little plot threads and stuff. And some of those characters and quests and missions and stuff are kind of interestingly tied to the main overarching theme, which is of this empire that is kind of wreaking havoc and using these special magical tools and weapons and stuff like that to sort of conquer the world. And so they've kind of gone through and wreaked havoc all over the world, and you're kind of coming through and picking up the pieces, fighting some of the minions and the generals that kind of get sent at you in these little cutscenes, and you'll kind of learn who they are through over the course of the game. But some of them are really not related at all. They're just kind of these little idiosyncratic little funny vignettes of a little side quest, and then you'll kind of continue off and along. And I think that works both for and against the game. I think it works for the game because it's actually, it's a little interesting kind of breath of fresh air, every, hour, 2 hours, whatever, into the length of the game is kind of like a different little world, different environment, different kinds of interactions you're having with the NPCs. But it also, a lot of times, feels pretty disjointed. The narrative is what is this? It feels sort of like a salad, right? It's just a total mishmash of things, kind of kitchen sink, throwing everything in there. And it almost feels times there was multiple development groups working on different parts of the game, and then they didn't really quite sync up all the way. So that's kind of the sense I got out of that. Now again, I think you have to give it a little bit of a break because it is an older game from the 90s, but that does really stick out. And the other part of the narrative that is, there's a couple of moments like this, but definitely towards the back half of the game, where it doesn't make a lot of sense. And there's one point where you're literally doing a little mini fetch quest between two NPCs, and I lost track of how many times I went back and forth. It's you fly to one, talk to them, get an item, take it to this other one, who can give you a different item, take it back to that one, then back to this one, and back to that one. And I was man, this is really just on its sleeve, terrible design. And it does that several times throughout the game, really, where it's I could have just this could have just been a direct go to the guy, he gives you the thing, instead of giving you the side quest. And that's kind of what I was alluding to before. It's it feels a little disjointed. There's a good handful of moments, significant amount, that feel just tacked on extra busy work kind of things, where it really screws up the narrative and screws up the story and kind of takes you out of it. Because there are some really cool characters and stuff like that that you interact with, and they're really kind of funny and they're very unique that I've not really seen in a lot of RPGs, and then you get little moments like that that just kind of suck you out of it, which is a little bit of a bummer. So the other kind of thread as you're going through, this narrative here is you are kind of like the dragon ascendant, kind of the one true one, and that's never really fleshed out at all whatsoever. Now that could be with how I actually finished the game. So part of that whole disjointed part that I'm keep beating up here is, even with this better quote-unquote translation, it's still like borderline too obtuse. And if you remember from my JRPG video what I talked about before, I kind of like a good narrative that like leaves a lot of empty spaces and you can kind of fill it in. And it was really kind of a miracle to pull that off in the early days with some of these games where they give you enough kind of breadcrumbs to keep you kind of exploring and questing and looking and searching and finding, and that's really a fun part of the game, but also not leaving you completely lost. You're like, I don't know where the heck to go. And this really threaded the needle, because there's games, in my opinion, that will fall flat on that, and you're just like, I don't know what the heck to do. And there's some that are like too linear. Final Fantasy X, or I guess is a good example, where it's just like, I'm just following the story along, and I'm not really doing anything. And there's a part of clarity or lack of clarity in some cases where that happens. And so that kind of happens here a lot. And so what actually happened is I actually finished the game in quote unquote, I guess the bad ending, which I learned after I finished the game, because I do not like looking stuff up. I like to come into it fresh. Right. I like to kind of experience the game as like the artist intended. And there was a couple things that I looked up towards the end, because I felt like it wasn't so much like how to beat a boss or anything, which I'll get to in a minute, or something like that, some kind of technical thing. It was just like, I don't quite understand how the heck where I'm supposed to go here. This doesn't quite make sense based on just the dialogue of the NPCs. So there was probably 2 or 3 instances of me looking that up. And it was just very quick, like, oh, okay, whatever, I'm dumb. I didn't understand what they were trying to tell me. But part of that is, when you get like the dragon powers and stuff, it doesn't really like guide you to get the rest of the dragon powers. So I got, I think, 3 of the dragon powers, and from what I gather, there's like 5. And so by the time you get the 5th one, you can like form this big, super badass, dragon form that you can take on. And there's also another character that you can get who can like fuse with other characters. But that system is just like not really laid out for you. And I just kept kind of bouncing along through the story, got to the end. The final boss fight it wasn't hard, but it felt like very sloggy. Like I think I sat there and fought the thing for like 45 minutes. I swear to God, it was like forever. I'm like, I'm good. I got enough mana potions, and I'm taking it down. I go like, I must be doing something wrong, because this is taking way too long, and I should be dead, or it should be dead. And then I'm like, maybe there's something, but I just kept fighting, and I remember kind of like dozing off and nodding off. And then I beat it, and then I beat the game, and I was like, oh, okay. I was like, that's a weird boss fight. It was like just a total, like a siege of attrition to fight this boss. I was like, that's not great. So I looked it up and I was like, oh, okay, if I would have got these other things, I would have actually triggered the final boss. But you have to actually have unlocked all your dragon powers to do that, which is very strange. But like the game in Final Fantasy X kind of does this too, where it's like you're doing the main thing, and then the game kind of like just says, oh, by the way, there's these like other weapons and stuff. And it doesn't really like couch it in any way. In Final Fantasy X, it was very much like, almost like a side carnival act. And then you get to the final boss, you're like, oh no, you really need these weapons to finish the game. But they're not really like tied, they don't really ground it or make it as special and meaningful as it actually is to mechanically beating the game. And this has that same kind of thing going on there. So, and I would say also, as in terms of like the boss fights and the combats, it's really kind of dumbed down a little bit. I would say this is probably one of the weakest games in terms of like just strategy and mechanics. Like you can just kind of brute force everything. And maybe it's because I was kind of getting lost and, like tracing my steps and stuff. So I kind of like, it was retroactively automatically grinding. So my levels were high. But I mean, all my levels were only in the 30s by the end of the game. And I gather some people would level up to 40. And I was like, okay, well, I didn't grind that much. But I found that I didn't really have to think too much about, the boss fights. A couple different dragon forms, some debuffs, some buffs on my characters, having like the better damaging characters in the party, because you can have a huge party of, I think there's like 8 people and you only have 4 at a time. But nothing really, you know, too taxing or anything. And just kind of everything was very straightforward. Sometimes certain boss mobs would take a long time. Sometimes they wouldn't. You know, just if you had the right rock, paper, scissors, that would make it easy. But there was no real like game stopper. So you can kind of take that in one of two ways. Like you won't get stuck, but also like, I don't mind like working on a puzzle in a boss. I just don't like that it sometimes is obtusely, you know, impossible to figure out the puzzle. So it was a little bit weak on the combat side of things. I would say that one of the other gameplay strengths was some of the dungeons and the puzzles. I really liked how in this game it was like the whole dungeon was a puzzle. Like there was one part where you go into like a dream land. You're kind of going into the guy's brain, into his dream, and it was the levels like constantly disappearing and reappearing based on the little triggers and traps, things that you stepped on. So you had to kind of like process of elimination, kind of logically work out where to go based on, oh, it's going to disappear here and then here, and you kind of have to look for clues. That was a really fun one. And then there was another one where like the whole level would spin multiple times, and it could spin different directions, and it would kind of confuse you. There was a couple other ones where like they have these like, this is a little bit more traditional, but they have these like elevators that kind of go different ways, and you have to kind of, you know, work it out. Those are a little bit fine. Those are kind of obfuscating really basic maze fundamentals, I would say. Those weren't that great, but you know, early on those were fine because it kind of gives you a little something to chew on as you're kind of bouncing around. But some of the later dungeon puzzles I thought were really cool. They were just interesting little things that you had to kind of work out. So that's kind of the general gist of the game. I set out for myself here sort of 5 pillars or 5 little topics I always want to try to touch on these games. And for my board game reviews, I've developed, you know, the 3 pillars. How long does it take to play? What is it like at the different player counts? And then kind of like a comparison, compare, contrast. What is it like other games, or where does it break apart from other games? And that will kind of lead me into the touchy-feely part of the review. You know, what does the game kind of feel like to play? And that was, those 3 pillars I think have worked well. That was kind of developed in partnership with a lot of the folks that watch the channel. We went back and forth when I used to have a Patreon back in the day. Some really good discussions kind of fleshed out. I was like, those are the 3 most important things that people really wanted to know about the board game reviews. How long does it take? What's the different player counts like? And then kind of compare it to some other games that are maybe in the same, you know, genre. So I took a stab here at 5 pillars for this. So if you have feedback on this, totally will appreciate and listen to it. And as long as it's respectful. Anyway, you know what I'm saying. So I'm just going to go through these 5. And so what system and specs, hacks, patches, whatever, you know, what's the kind of hardware that I ran the thing on? I already talked about that. It's on the 3DS. I ran it with the modified ROM patch, which again, I'll link to it. You can find this on the Switch. I played it on the Switch online for a little bit, maybe a couple hours into that before restarting it over here. And I think it plays great on there. It doesn't have the better translation and that kind of thing. So if you're watching this in the future, I've heard some rumors as I've been sort of researching this series that there will be a remake, maybe, I don't know. So maybe if they come out with a Pixel remaster, which I think would be great, because maybe it'll clean up some of the narrative issues, the translation issues. You could give a, you know, kind of a light coat of paint on the graphics, which I really enjoy as they are. Frankly, I don't think they need to do a lot there because I like the kind of pixel graphics. And the battle graphics, which I didn't mention, but you saw in the some of the B-roll footage there. I like that sort of angle. It kind of reminds me of like a Suikoden or something like that, or 100 Heroes. Sorry, Eiyuden Chronicles 100 Heroes. And so yeah, I like that stuff. So anyway, that's the system that I played it on. Second pillar would be, why am I reviewing this? Because, you know, this is a board game channel. And one thing that sort of stuck out to me about this is the early implementation of auto battle. And I thought that was kind of interesting because there is one sort of interesting piece that these video games have, especially the more of the JRPG type of genre, not so much in the Western RPGs, but a little bit there, but where of that grind piece of it. And as I was playing this, and also Phantasy Star 2, which I'm also playing a ROM modded version of because I tried playing Phantasy Star 2 a couple of months ago, like the basic version on the Switch, and no good, no bueno. But I then, through my little ROM 3DS Hackorama research rabbit hole that I've been in, I found out there's a definitive edition of Phantasy Star 2 there's a patch for, and I'm playing that. It's really fun. So, but my point with that is that it also has auto battle. And I was like, that's a kind of interesting thing that you could see in a board game, like playing a Descent or, I don't know, Warhammer Quest or some Gloomhaven or something like that, where a lot of times those games are so scenario based and so mission based, and so much like, almost like a more of a tactical RPG, like a Final Fantasy Tactics or something like that. Because when you play those strategy RPGs, Fire Emblem, and I would keep bouncing off of those because those take so long to play through a level. Like you'll be in Fire Emblem, and then, you know, after the first few intro levels, you'll play one, and like it's an hour and a half later, and I'm still playing through the same fight. I'm like, is this a StarCraft level? What is this? Which is cool. I'm not trying to say negative things about it, because it's just like, I want to vibe with the tactical RPGs, the strategy RPGs. I just haven't found one yet, but I want to. But the board game world is basically that. Like if you play Gloomhaven, for example, just to pick on the number one dog in the game, it's like you read a little bit of story text, then you have a big 2-hour tactical strategy, board thing going on. But they don't really have like that big sort of, and maybe they shouldn't have it, but just the question came in my mind, not like, what if there could be a game that had a mini game that was like, oh, okay, so you got to go do the quest, you got to go travel across the land and find the necromancer over on the next, continent over. How would you implement this sort of auto battling, grindy sort of thing in a way that's fun, not boring and tedious, and not just, pushing spreadsheets and paperwork around on the table? And I was thinking, oh, well, I wonder if that would be a way to like make a game, because you could sort of open up some of the board games, because they're usually very narrowly focused on like a certain region or like a dungeon, or something, like a small area. But to open it up to like a large sort of questing area, and not just have it like be, dot, 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 dot on the map, and then you go and you have a big encounter for 2 hours, and then you go dot, dot, dot on the map, and then how could you sort of incorporate some of that sort of fun, in my opinion, leveling up, and make it kind of a mini game kind of idea. It's probably a terrible idea, but that's to me what kind of struck me about this game is like, why haven't more games done this kind of auto battling thing? And people probably hate it. Like, what am I doing? I'm just kind of auto battling. But it's like you're doing this little activity, sort of resource management thing. Make sure you have enough potions and mana, and make sure you can get back to the inn to heal up and rest while you're exploring, while you're looking for quest clues, while you're sort of unlocking parts of the map and that kind of thing. And because if you didn't have anything going on while you did that, that would be kind of boring. And there is a balancing act there with how many sort of random encounters come up too, because this game, I think, probably has too many. I think it verges on the too many side, but not crazy. Anyway, I went too long on that whole auto battle thing. Let's see, the finish time, I always look up on How Long to Beat, and it says about 28 hours. There's a website called howlongtobeat.com. I was probably about 32 hours, although it's hard to gauge playing it on my 3DS, so I had to kind of guesstimate that, but I definitely went over 30. I don't know if it was like 30 and a half or 32 hours, but it feels like I went a little bit over. So I was actually surprised when I finished it, because I went and looked. I'm like, how long did this take? And I was like, oh my gosh, this is like, it's kind of a benefit, because a lot of these older games, sometimes they're like 15, 20 hours, maybe less, like 10, which is fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a short game. But I was like, wow, this is like, I got a lot of bang for your buck here. And so that was kind of a good little benefit. Like, it does, it's a nice kind of big sweeping story. I think it has some cool things, but then again, I think that playtime could probably come down to a 25 hours or even a little bit less, and be a better, tighter story as well. So, but then that's what you're kind of in for. The next thing is like the guide. Is the guide required here? And I don't know if I'll keep this thing, because typically if you like need a guide, which isn't often that you like really need a guide, I don't think. But to me, that's just a bad design. Like, I mean, granted, I could be a dumbass and like just be too dumb for a game. But, certain cases, like in this case, I kind of broke my rule a little bit, because it was like, it's an old game. It's been translated and retranslated, and that kind of thing. And I didn't have the manual right away. Once I read that, I kind of got a better sense of like, oh, okay, it kind of introduces you to some of the worlds and the characters and some of their special abilities and all that stuff. And It's even with that though, I still had to look up like a couple of things, and I still was like, I'm gonna forgive it because like I kind of understood, but like I said, the dialogue just wasn't there. So that kind of knocks it down. So I think a guide like is lightly required here, you know, but generally mechanically and sort of figuring out what to do broadly is fine. It's just a couple of like really persnickety little instances where it's like, I don't even know what the hell this game is even telling me to do at this point. And then it was like I said, there's like the one part where it says you've got to go back and back and back and back. I'm like, this is, you guys just could have cut this out and the game would have been probably like a classic right up there with Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest or something. And then that leads me into my last pillar, which is like, what is it like? Which I talked about a little bit earlier, was it's a lot like a Dragon Quest game, in my opinion, or some of the early Final Fantasies, probably like the first, actually like really like the first one only. Because the other ones have a much tighter story, a tighter narrative that goes through it. You still have that kind of like random daily encounter, you know, this week's episode of Kung Fu, you know, this happens. You still had that a little bit in some of the later Final Fantasies, you know, in the first 6 of them. But the first one is a lot like this. And this game, Breath of Fire, and then a couple of the Dragon Quest games are like that, where you are just kind of bouncing from place to place. The game kind of shoos you over to the next little region that gets unlocked. You kind of do your stuff there. Then there is a little bit of backtracking, and I know some people don't care for backtracking, and I'm there with you on that. But I also like to feel like it's more of a sandbox where, you know, things will change. And that happens in here. Like, you will go to places that you've been to before, and you'll show back up and it's like, oh, there's brand new NPC dialogue here. And I don't want to spoil anything, but like, oh, the landscape of this town has changed, or this town doesn't exist, or, you know, this sort of thing grew out of the ground. And so stuff changes. So it doesn't really feel like backtracking in that regard. And so I really, really kind of like that. And so this does a really good job of that. Again, with some of the caveats I've talked about throughout the video. The last thing I'll do is I will score this. And I know some people, video game people, like to score. I'm not big on, I don't score my board game reviews. I'll go score them on Board Game Geek if you care. But I try to be objective with my scores. There's the Off the Shelf guys that do a board game review channel. They give like a recommender score and a personal score, which I think is nice. You can consider these scores like a recommender score. I try to be a little bit objective about it. And this would be out of 10. So this one will get a 6 out of 10. I think that I really enjoyed the game. It has some of those things that really kind of hold it back with the delivery and the dialogue and that kind of stuff. And the fighting is not great. But the thing that keeps it up at a 6 and not at a 5, or keeps it down from a 7, I've already talked about. But the characters are quirky. The world is funky. I like the different like types of villages and different types of people and races that you'll run into. A lot of different sort of characters that kind of come into your party as you move along. The bad guys are just whatever, but you know, they're there. And I don't expect much out of a bad guy from a 1990s video game, frankly. They're like, oh, I'm trying to rule the world and just do demon stuff to it. It's like, okay, that's the bad guy. Yeah, but I liked some of the characters in the dialogue and stuff, and a little bit of that is this fan translation patch thing too. But it's really cool. It was fun enough to keep you interested, and like the character models, the monsters that you fight, those are really neat. You've been seeing those through some of the B-roll here. I like this quirky little things. I mean, they could probably use a little more variety, I guess, in the monsters, but I'm not going to hold them too much. But that's why it hits about a 6 for me, and I can think people might enjoy it more than me. Honestly, I think objectively, and you know, you could probably give it a 7 or so, and then higher. I don't know, 7. I don't know, and I think people may bounce right the heck off the game just because of some of its obtuseness and sort of basicness. It may not even give it a 5. You know what I'm saying? So, but anyway, that's a little review there of Breath of Fire. So hope you enjoyed the review. Look for more of these in the near future, and look for some more board game reviews, of course. So thanks.